God still speaks today. Now, if I say that to you, what is your first reaction? When I share that idea with most people, they tend to think, this guy's crazy! That's what they think, but that's not the truth, because the reality is that he still speaks today. Most of us just don't tune in to listen. So in this video, I want to quickly just run through eight different ways that he still speaks to us today. Bear with me because I'm going to go through it rapidly, but I think if you follow me and you listen to what I'm saying, you'll learn a lot. Alright, so the very first way that he still speaks to us today and that we should turn to when we want direction is simply through what Jesus taught. Now, if Jesus really is the Son of God, then it pays and it makes sense for us to listen to the things that he said. In fact, God actually said himself, "This is my beloved Son, hear him." That's giving us very clear advice and very clear indication that the one that we need to listen to primarily to find out what God has to say is his Son, Jesus. But Jesus didn't cover every single aspect of every little thing in our lives that will ever come up to meet, you know? So if we want to hear from God, what are some of the other ways that we can actually refer to? One such way is actually our conscience. That's that still small voice that's within inside each and every one of us. It acts kind of like a moral compass to guide us when we're doing the right thing, to tell us when we're doing the wrong thing, even to kind of warn us when we're getting close to doing the wrong thing. So listen to it. It's another way that God actually speaks. A third way is simply through the advice of other believers. Now, the primary source we want to turn to for this source of other counsel, this source of godly counsel, is actually found in the scriptures. It's found in the Bible. It's from the apostles, it's from the prophets. You know, they have so much good advice that you find not just in the epistles, but also in the Old Testament, in some of the prophets, book of Daniel, book of Revelation. There's so much wisdom there that we can turn to when we need advice. Having said that, this form of counsel is not only limited to simply what is written in the scriptures. We can also get godly advice and godly counsel from the people that are still around today. These could be other people that are fellow Christians, people that have demonstrated with their lives that they actually are in tune with what God is saying. You can actually lean on them for advice and weigh it up against the other ways that God can speak to us today. Okay, way number 4 is actually direct revelations. Now, God can actually communicate it with us personally on an individual level through such things as dreams, visions, just personal revelations. You see an example of this not just in the Old Testament but also in the New Testament. Peter receiving the vision about all things now being clean is one example. Another example is Jesus' father, Joseph, his earthly father, being warned about when to flee from one other area to another based on dreams he was receiving. That's a very legitimate way that God speaks, and he still speaks using dreams even today. Now, you can call me a little bit cheeky on this one if you want, but I'm going to combine steps number 5 and 6, the methods number 5 and 6 that God still speaks, into one, and those are circumstances and coincidences. Those are both methods that God can use to actually reveal his will to us today. Sometimes people refer to them as open or closed doors. For example, let's say that you're praying about whether or not to go and do some volunteer missionary work in an African country like the Congo, and you learn that, say, they've just made a new law that says anyone who goes there and preaches will be sentenced to life in prison. That's an obvious closed door on that decision. However, to reverse that scenario, let's say you just learned that they actually opened up their doors to missionaries and said that anyone coming to preach the gospel will receive a free plane ticket and free room and accommodation and food and all those things. That would be taken as a pretty strong circumstantial leading from God, or an open door for you to follow through on that. So that's an example. Pay attention to your circumstances, your coincidences, which has more to do with the timing of the circumstance, and see if that could be another way that God is actually trying to guide you and lead you into what you should do. Okay, now for step number 7, step number 7, okay, for the 7th way that God still speaks to us today, it's actually through our own personal burdens. You see, God wants us to enjoy our lives. He doesn't want us to be miserable, and a lot of times we can have a personal burden within us to do something that's actually God kind of leading us in a certain direction. Now, as long as that burden doesn't contradict something that Jesus has clearly said for us not to do, something that God has clearly revealed in one of the other ways for us not to do, then we can feel pretty confident that, hey, you know, it seems like it's another open door for us to walk in those things that we enjoy. We don't want to put too much stock on this, however, otherwise we'll just end up doing whatever we want. But do pay attention to your personal burdens and your inner convictions as you try to find God's will today. Okay, so for number 8, the last one we're going to cover today, that is a method that God can speak to us with. It's actually just through signs, otherwise known as miracles, in certain situations. Now, there are times in the Bible where we see that God would give a miraculous sign to someone, particularly when he was asking them to do something that went against their natural reasoning. A good example of this is Gideon. You know, there's a story in the Old Testament where God was wanting him to go to war in circumstances that just seemed irrational from our human rational mind, and yet God was behind that decision. And so Gideon said, hey, before I do this, can you give me a sign? Lord, give me a sign. That's what he said. And so God actually responded by through the use of a fleece to highlight to him, to make it clear through the sign that he was behind that instruction. So in the same way, when we are feeling like God is telling us to do something that goes against our natural reasoning, we shouldn't be afraid to ask God to give us a sign, some kind of clear sign that this is really what he wants. Don't abuse that, however, because we don't want to be guilty of tempting God. So if he's clearly told you to do something and you know that it's in line with other parts of the Bible, you can see it confirmed in 2 and 3 witnesses, don't demand a sign in those situations. Rather, reserve it for those times where everything seems to be leaning against what you think God is saying, and so you need an additional sign to confirm his will for you. So guys, there you have it. I have just given you 8 ways that God still speaks to people today. I want you to try as much as you can to actually consider all of those different ways. And usually if we have to make a decision and we kind of go through that list, you know, maybe one by one, maybe even taking a pen and a pencil and literally marking which way God seems to be pointing on each of those different levels, we can get a pretty clear leading one way or the other in terms of what we should do. We won't always necessarily have 100% clarity on what the right thing is, but if we're sincere in trying to find his will, we can usually get a pretty good general feel for where he's pointing. So do make use of those methods. And yeah, hey, remember to keep seeking the kingdom. God bless you guys.
Greed and hypocrisy. People ain't who they claim to be, they saying, but ain't living as plain to see. But I wanna live my life truly free, cause this ain't no game to me.